This is one of those that I have been talking about for ages on this show. I mean, all the way back in the old radio studio, through the time we were in the small little music box studio, all the way into, you know, the garage. I've always talked about this. And it is the social media's role in the modern sort of media landscape, and how it is very dangerous for the U.S. government to go to those companies, these tech firms, and ask them to be the arbiters of sort of the news media truth for the population. So this article is chronicles a lot of that, how that has played out over the last several years. And obviously one of the things it starts with is Russiagate, because that's one of the first real, like, the government is really wanting to drag in Facebook, Google, social media platforms, CEOs and managers, and say, how could this happen? There was disinformation going on. And what this article goes about talking about is the wake of that is, well, there are a lot of highly politicized, extremely partisan hooks that are now in these managers of sort of the window that most people have into their actual, you know, the outer world. And so our perception of that is being tainted. In fact, so they start by talking about Mark Zuckerberg in particular, and the bulk of this article does talk about Facebook. So they say, so dining with far-right figures and their influence over the information that appears in your feed is apparent. So there's been a lot of criticism that Mark Zuckerberg has had for just having donors and going out to fancy dinners with people who are pretty big deals on the far right. Before I get too far into the article, I see there is a super chat already from old Dave. Thank you for the super chat, $5 there. I don't know what y'all are talking about, but I think you guys are fighting the good fight. I hope you guys keep it up. Love Hard Lens Media. All right, thank you. Yeah, this is us fighting the good fight, and, you know, warning that you're, you know, of something that people I think mostly already know is beware of getting your news from Facebook, but not because it's the independent sources that are coming after you, but your timeline is biased. So Facebook isn't the only Silicon Valley firm that's masquerading as a nonpartisan as it curates facts that you see in ad posts and searches. Google, Twitter, Microsoft, others are deeply wedded to the U.S. security state and the billionaires that it upholds. So which information about what event survives, this is a good, so this is coming from Walter Lippmann's groundbreaking 1922 survey or study on the media and news and how we interact with it, which is extremely applicable even here in the well into the technology ages. You know, so which information about a news event survives the crucible of control over that information bottlenecks, gives the controller incredible power to shape the consciousness of readers around the world about the outside world. So the manufacturing of consent. So it's almost like it's very Noam Chomsky kind of idea. We've got more super chats that I want to acknowledge real quick. Unknown Space Pioneer, Happy New Year. Live long and prosper. Good to see you. Also, Density McCartney, live long and prosper as well. So got some Star Trek.
Those were independent of each other.
Yeah, those were right after each other. Yeah. But this is true. So this is the principle that they're getting at there is true, that the person who controls the platform wields a lot of power. And so they talk about, they go from that and they talk about, yeah, it's one thing to be concerned about, you know, who these donors are and who these right-wing, do we got another one in there? We did. Another super chat.
Oh my God, guys, you are spoiling us.
Yeah, I know, this is great.
Keep them coming, keep them coming.
Seriously, you guys cover actual news, and I appreciate you guys and gal. Yes.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Kira gets some special appreciation from Dave there. Yeah, so this points out that he's, you know, been seen whining and dining with Fox News' Tucker Carlson, Washington Free Beacon editor Matt Continetti, conservative commentator Ben Shapiro, Byron York of the Washington Examiner. He's their chief political correspondent. And so, yeah, these are certainly people that shape the kind of news. And he came under a good bit of fire for having this now sort of sanctioned news area in the timeline feed, and including things like from Breitbart, which it's hard to take things Breitbart say as objective in almost any way. I mean, they're sort of the news of the alt-right. You know, it's Steve Bannon's paper. So, yeah, okay, thanks for making sure you filter out fake news there, Facebook, putting Breitbart in front of everyone's face. But then, again, Russiagate is what they go into next, because that's the big thing that sort of puts pressure on this. And they note that so popular press around social media companies to prune users' news feeds grew dramatically in the wake of 2016 presidential election. In January of 2017, a report drafted almost exclusively by the fiercely anti-Trump CIA presented the narrative of a Russian influence campaign, setting the stage for vetting the veracity of newsfeed information based on standards set out by the security state. So a year later, the Pentagon and the White House set up an interstate strategic competition. They said that interstate strategic competition, not terrorism, is now the primary concern of the U.S. national security. So basically, this combating fake news and cyber misinformation or whatever is like, oh, that's the primary thing. And so what happened in the wake of that was, we have more super chats. We're getting spoiled by the people. I saw that one. But from Snork Y2K, what's up, Snork? Harlan's Media needs podcast on Spotify like Michael Moore.
We're actually working on that right now.
We're working on that. Podcasting, forthcoming.
It would be really great, you guys, because then I could listen more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying.
We're getting there.
This article then goes into the new knowledge thing. I think a lot of you people probably watch Jimmy Dore as well. We're in the know on new knowledge, the fact that there's this group that's meant to be a source of fact checking and help people, combat and find out where they're Russian trolls. And it turns out, no, they spend more money than the NRA did in the last 7 election cycles in one election in Alabama, making fake trolls that they then said were Russian trolls. The owner of New Knowledge himself was banned from Facebook for doing that. And it's like, all of the people that are trying to combat fake news are themselves profiteers of it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, Microsoft's NewsGuard app. Facebook grows their broadcasting empire as well. So they're trying to move into the live streaming thing. They've got people partnering up there. There's going to be some pushes there. This is a very long trove of this type of activity. And this is the kind of thing I'm not even going to get into every little minutia because they're all essentially the same. It's, the CIA, the Pentagon, the government as is wants to partner with people who can control and gatekeep for news and media narratives and says, hey, here are some government think tanks or some government-aligned things to help you figure out what's real and what's fake. And by the way, could you produce some media yourself for us? And by the way, would you make sure that everything you produce conforms to the narrative that we as an empire want to put forward? We need to have that narrative. And it's constant examples of this bias. And it's like, who do you think is going to lose out? It's not right versus left. It's not the conservatives or the liberals it's not a bias this way or that way. It's the people that lose out, right? It's the truth seekers. It's the ones that say, hey, maybe there should be some checks to the power that's in there. It's the dissenting voices. It's those that are critical of those in power that are going to be the ones that are silenced first. And it happens on the right and the left, and it's going to come for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really quick, I want to give a shout out to Snork Y2K for another wonderful $2 super chat. Thank you so much. And Kit needs a ramen with an egg. I'm sure he is delightfully eating ramen as we speak, since it is breakfast time in Japan right now. But Carrie, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah. So this is a topic that we definitely hear a lot about, and it's one of those topics, for me, like a variety, that because I don't think that I really completely understand the minutia of how social media algorithms work and all of that. I feel like I can't, speak fully about, how this could be remedied. But the first question that comes up for me in something like this is, isn't there always going to be a gatekeeper? Isn't there always going to be a bottleneck? And how do we, as an independent media organization, combat that? How do we, as individuals, combat that? Because the way that I see it, largely, our social media platforms are somewhat responsible for us being able to spread correct information, right? Because before the internet and our social media platforms, all we had were however many of the mainstream media outlets there are, and those 4 or to 6 voices, basically giving us all of our information. And now we do have an opportunity to spread more information and have more voices. And so my question is, does it get dangerous to try to quiet voices or say that certain voices that spread misinformation are not allowed on this platform? What do you guys think about that gatekeeper piece?
So I think that that's a very good series of points. I think in a sense both of what you guys are saying is simultaneously really profound. And also, I don't even think that they're contradictory. I think they actually go with each other. So like Paul's point is like, look, the U.S. government, U.S. can't directly say, "Hey, freedom of speech." They can't tell you what to say in that frame. But if there's 4 or 5 companies, so if again you were talking about there's 4 or 5 news channels before where it was, I would say let's even go before the 1996 Telecommunication Act. You had like 4 channels that broadcast nationwide, and then you had thousands of independents. So there's still your nationwide, but there's really any independent stuff is too small to really matter in the big picture. And now we're at a time where you have still kind of 4 or 5, or in this case 6 companies controlling 90% of media. But like you said, you also have the ability for Hard Lens Media, for example, to take off and do what it's doing. I think that the one thing with the balance is that the government is using this as a means to enforce, to get around freedom of speech. I think that's the big thing. I think that, in a sense, there will always be a gatekeeper for it to be someone has to provide a medium for stuff to happen. So maybe like one example would be if you restore net neutrality, maybe Facebook or YouTube can't prioritize these algorithms in such a way. Another thing is that they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth on is that they say, oh, we're just a platform where you're free to post whatever you want and we're not going to do anything about it. But then they're also like, but we're also going to prioritize who gets the money through and who advertisers spend money on and what news gets covered. Like news itself, the category that we're in, has already been so heavily deflected over to mainstream news. It used to be about 50-50. 4 or 5 channels get 50% of the views. 100 channels get 50% of the views. Now it's 75% of the views go to about 4 or 5 channels, whereas we get 25%. So I don't ever think that there's going to be a perfect solution, but if we go down the route that we're currently going down, I feel like we will end up right where we started. Because right now it's good, we have a channel, but who's to say that if we kept going down this route that we would have a channel in 5 or 10 years?
I think you may wind up in a place that feels similar to where we started, quote unquote. Think before pre-96 Telecommunications Act, but I think it will probably surpass that and go beyond in ways that you don't want to go. And let me explain what I mean by that. I think we need to separate a couple of ideas here. So there's the concept of sort of gatekeeping, and there's also the concept of the bottleneck, right? So the bottleneck would sort of be how much can someone get their news out, their point of view, their free speech, right? You know, if there are only so many FCC licenses for broadcasting, and you can't get a radio station or a television show or on the spectrum in that way, then there's a bottleneck to how much you can amplify your voice, your message, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a gatekeeper other than licenses for, spectrum and actual television stations wherever you may live or being a part of a company that does that. In the age of the internet, there's this massive, like, I think back to the early 90s, oh, the internet's going to save everything. There's massive freedom of communication and all this stuff, and we're sort of allowing people to come in and say, no, we've got to restrict it and do it in this way, and you can't say that. But what if people believe that thing that you said that is fake, and then now I've got a bunch of people going around believing that fake thing. What are we going to do? And people just go into their echo chambers and all these things, and we need to correct the record is literally the name of, you know, it's not one of the fact-checking ones for Facebook, but maybe it is actually.
It sounds familiar.
It's one of those ones. But I just don't like the idea of like, okay, well, we're going to have people who can be gatekeepers and say what's cool and what's not cool. And the way we're going to sort of, you know, make sure that it's all on the up and up is we're going to have fact checkers. And please don't look too much behind the curtain on who are the fact checkers and whatnot, because they're going to officially sanction things as like the total true. Right? And because so ultimately what ends up happening is to the user at home, now things are being, because you started by saying you don't know the minutia about algorithms and whatnot. And it's like, it's not about knowing the minutia, it's about knowing the principle. If someone has the ability to say, this is, you should read this, and you shouldn't see this, well, that gives power for that person who says what I should see and what I shouldn't see. And then to the person who's saying, these are the true things and those are the fake things, and the fact that they have power and they have it's not hard to figure out that you end up curating things into a particular, you manufacture consent in that way, and that's this huge danger.
Yeah.
And
well,
so
you can
I
see
always
that
say
second layer being almost like a cozy little security blanket too, right? Like, oh, we have this fact checking, you know, entity over here. So no worries, like get your cozy like security blanket and don't worry about yeah, that's it.
Right? You become complacent because you have this assurance that like it's going to be true, and it's just like, no, everybody, that's intellectually lazy, right? You should know something is true by the veracity of the arguments that are made, by the availability of evidence, by the corroboration that is available on whatever the topic is. Like these are like journalistic fluency and understanding is not so rare. We go around in this country, and this really pisses me off. Like, oh, people are losing faith in journalism. It's because people are not journalistically literate. Like, no, people are perfectly smart and perfectly rational, and we just keep getting fed things like, who out there believes that Epstein killed himself in prison, and the guards just walked away, and it was just a big mistake.
They were sleeping.
They were asleep. Yeah, nobody is buying that.
No.
Right? Because people have reasonable faculties and are rational, actors in this current world. And to shame people and say, you know, we've got to have people tell you what's true. And there's trust in institutions. And I had a conversation actually over the holidays with family, and I think this is an interesting time to bring it up. So the question of like, okay, but if you say the mainstream press, right? The New York Times, Associated Press, right? The PBS, the driest, what you can think of is like, okay, well, that's definitely establishment, but like they're Reuters, right? It's Reuters. At what point, like, if you say, oh, when they're talking about topic X or topic Y, I've got to still be suspect because, when they talk about Venezuela, I know that there's this particular bias that comes from outlets like this, even though it's Reuters, even though it's the Associated Press. Doesn't that way lie madness, right? If you have to be skeptical of everything you read from every source, isn't that just a recipe for insanity?
Is that a little bit of where we are right now, though?
Yeah,
because that's how I feel personally right now, especially after this year.
I think that's the counterpoint, right? Yeah. Okay, maybe that way lies madness, but if you are actually having stories fed to you that fit a particular agenda all of the time, and your defense is, boy, it would be insane if I had to be skeptical of everything, I guess I will just believe everything this particular outlet is telling me because they're the most authoritative in my, cultural circle.
And what's
isn't that madness also?
It is, because we've talked about this before. Like, we talk about, like, oh, we like Bernie Sanders, we like AOC, we like Tulsi Gabbard, but we don't worship them. We don't say, Bernie Sanders said this, it is the immutable word of the Lord. He is divine, come down to talk to us and tell us the truth. That's not a healthy way to look at candidates. It's also not a healthy way to look at media organizations for the exact same reason. So we just covered just about a few days ago, last year, I should say,
it was all the way last year
that the New York Times was literally recrafting history that didn't exist about the past of America. And when they were finally confronted by historians saying that's not history, their response was, We're journalists, not historians. And my point I was making, so the people that read the New York Times and they say this is the word of, this is law, this is true, this is truth. If they just read the New York Times, they're going to discount all the historians that say otherwise, and they're going to think that, again, we were literally saying like that the New York Times was literally legitimizing white supremacist arguments about history and slavery. And who are they to do that? And they're even
I think partially unwittingly too, which is weird. Like they weren't trying to, bolster or legitimize modern white supremacist thought. That what they were trying to do was basically sort of involve themselves in historical revisionism to make it seem like, all the more reason that we need to be in identity politics needs to be the overwhelming message of the day.
And this is why, again, I've always growing, but I've always been against identity politics because it's always going to be used by the people with the most power, not by the people with the least power.